The whip cracked across Gromma Mudborn's shoulder for the third time, and still she would not kneel. The market square of Fording had been cleared of its stalls that morning, the fish carts and grain sacks hauled away to make room for a ring of packed dirt and a crowd 3 men deep, all of them jeering, all of them hungry for blood that was not their own. Chains rattled at Gromma's wrists, connecting her to an iron stake driven into the earth, and across from her another orc knelt in the dirt, a young male with a broken tusk and a wound in his side that had stopped bleeding only because there was so little blood left in him to give. Lord Herrick Draymore's overseer, a wiry man named Pell with a scar bisecting his lip, stood at the ring's edge with a whip in one hand and a purse in the other, shouting for the crowd to see the great she-orc finish what she started. "Kill him," Pell said again, louder this time so the whole square could hear it. "Kill him, or I will have you both flogged until the dirt drinks its fill." Gromma's amber eyes did not move from Pell's face. Sweat and dirt streaked the green-gray of her skin, and blood ran in a thin line from a cut above her brow, but her spine was iron, and her jaw was set the way a woman's jaw sets when she has already decided something and no whip in the world will unmake that decision. "He is my kin," she said, and her voice, low and rough as river stone, carried over the crowd's noise. "I do not kill kin for the amusement of cowards who watch from behind a fence." The whip came a fourth time, and this time it caught her across the collarbone, tearing the laces of her leather cuirass, and she did not cry out, though the crowd wanted her to, though they leaned forward hungry for the sound. Cyrus Ford stood at the edge of the ring with his spear planted, and his knuckles white around the shaft, one of 6 guardsmen posted to keep the crowd back, and he had been ordered, specifically and by name, to strike her himself if she would not comply. He had been given the whip once already and had refused to raise it, and Pell had taken it from his hand with a look of contempt that Cyrus had felt in his stomach like a blade. He was 24 years old, unremarkable in the way that men who work hard and go unnoticed are unremarkable, brown-haired and lean-shouldered, a guardsman's cloak over a boiled leather jerkin that had been mended more times than it had been new. He had grown up on the ferry landing at the north end of town, raised by his uncle after his parents drowned crossing the Ash in a spring flood when he was a boy of 9, and he had learned early that the world did not stop to notice men like him, and that the only thing a man like him could do was hold his post and try to be decent when decency was hard to come by. It was hard to come by now. Pell raised the whip a 5th time, and Gromma Mudborn lifted her chin to meet it, and something in Cyrus Ford's chest simply broke. He stepped forward before he had decided to step forward, his boots crossing the line of packed dirt that marked the ring's edge, and he put himself between the whip and the orc woman's bared shoulder, and the leather cracked across his own forearm instead, hard enough to draw blood through his sleeve. The crowd went silent, then loud, then silent again. "Ford," Pell said, his voice gone thin with disbelief. "Get out of my ring." "No," Cyrus said, and his voice shook only a little. "You've had your sport. She won't kill him and I won't make her, and if you want to whip someone for it, you can whip me instead of a woman in chains." "She is not a woman," Pell spat. "She's a beast that walks like one, and you would do well to remember which side of that fence you stand on, boy." Cyrus did not look away from him. He was aware, distantly, of the other guardsmen shifting on their feet, of the crowd's murmur turning uncertain, of Lord Draymore's colors black and silver, a boar's head on the banner hanging limp from a pole at the square's edge, where the usurper himself had not bothered to come and watch, sending Pell to do his cruelty for him instead. He was aware of Gromma Mudborn's eyes on him, wide now, studying him with an intensity that made the hair on his arms rise. "I stand on the side that doesn't beat chained women for coin," Cyrus said. "Draymore can have my post if he wants it. I'll not have this on my hands." Pell's face twisted, and for a moment Cyrus thought the man might strike him again harder, might call for the other guards to seize him. But the crowd had begun to murmur in a different key now, uneasy, some of them shamed, a few of them even calling out in support of the guardsman who had stepped into the whip's path. Fording was a river town, a town of millers and ferrymen and farmers who had watched Lord Draymore's soldiers come through twice already this season taking grain for the treasury. And there was no great love for the usurper here, whatever fear kept their mouths shut most days. Pell lowered the whip, breathing hard, and spat into the dirt near Cyrus's boot. "Take him to the cells," he said to the other guards, "and put chains on the orc bitch's kin as well. We'll see what his lordship makes of a guardsman who forgets his place." They dragged Cyrus away with rough hands, and as they pulled him from the ring he looked back once, just once, and found Gromma Mudborn watching him still, her chains rattling as she strained toward him against the stake, something unreadable moving behind those fierce amber eyes. He did not know in that moment that he had just done the only thing in his whole ordinary life that would ever truly matter. He only knew that he could not have done otherwise, and that some things were worth a night in a cell to have done at all. The cell they threw him into was little more than a stone box beneath the old market hall, damp with river seep and lit by a single high window through which the last gray light of evening came slanting down. Cyrus sat with his back against the wall and his wounded forearm cradled against his chest, and he had begun to make peace with the idea that he would lose his post, perhaps worse, when the door at the end of the corridor groaned open and booted feet came down the stone steps. It was not Pell. It was two guardsmen he knew, Aldous and Ben, men he had shared watches with for 3 years, and between them, stumbling but upright, wrists still bound in iron, was Gromma Mudborn. "Orders from the keep," Aldous said, not meeting Cyrus's eyes. "She's to be held here till Draymore decides what use she is. Pell wanted her thrown in with the other orc, but the she-orc near tore his arm off trying, so here she stays instead. Lucky you, Ford." They shoved her into the cell beside his, close enough that, when the door clanged shut and their footsteps retreated up the stairs, there was only a rusted iron grate separating the two small stone rooms, close enough that Cyrus could see her clearly in the dying light, could see the fitted dark leather of her cuirass, laced tight over a body built for war and yet unmistakably a woman's body, could see the torn lacing at her shoulder where the whip had caught her, could see the long braid of black hair, threaded through with small bones and a single ring of hammered copper, that fell over one shoulder to her waist. She was tall even sitting, taller than most men standing, with skin the color of river stone in shadow, green touched with gray, and tusks that curved neat and pale from her lower jaw. And for all the fierceness of her, for all the raw power coiled in her shoulders and arms, she was beautiful in a way that struck something loose in Cyrus's chest that he did not have a name for yet. "You are a fool," she said without preamble, her amber eyes fixed on him through the grate. "So I've been told," Cyrus said, "twice today, and it isn't even fully dark yet." Something that might have been a laugh, low and surprised, escaped her before she could stop it. She pressed her bound hands to the grate, studying the blood drying on his forearm. "That was meant for me," she said. "I know. You do not know me. You do not know my kin, my clan, why I am chained in your lord's dirt ring like a dog, and yet you stepped into a whip for me." Her voice was not soft. Exactly nothing about her seemed built for softness, but there was something underneath the roughness of it now, something careful, as if she were turning the fact of him over in her hands the way a smith turns unfamiliar ore. Why? Cyrus considered the question honestly, because she seemed the sort of woman who would know a false answer the moment it left his mouth. "Because nobody was going to stop it," he said finally. "And somebody should have, that's all. I've spent my whole life watching things happen because nobody with the standing to stop them cared enough to try, and I decided a long time ago that if I ever had the chance to be the one who tried, I would take it, even if it cost me something. I didn't expect it to cost quite this much, honestly." Gromma studied him a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, she sat back against the far wall of her cell, her chains pooling in her lap, and some of the fierce tension went out of her shoulders. "My clan is the Mudborn," she said. "We hold the eastern ridgelands beyond the Ash, and for 2 generations there has been a treaty between my people and the Baron of this valley, the true Baron, Asheville's line, not the usurper who wears his name now. I was sent as envoy, to carry word to the true heir that my clan still honors the old peace, if he yet lives and yet means to reclaim what is his. Draymore's men took me on the road 3 days from here. My escort is dead. The boy in the ring is the only other of my party who yet breathes, and I will not be made to kill him for sport, whatever whip they raise against me. Cyrus absorbed this slowly, feeling the shape of the danger widen around him, a usurper, a hidden heir, a warband envoy fallen into the wrong hands, and himself now tangled in the middle of it for no better reason than that he could not stand to watch a woman whipped. "The true heir," he said. "Asheville had a nephew, didn't he? I remember hearing years back before Draymore came a boy who vanished after some scandal. Thief, they called him, branded and cast out." "Rowan Asheville," Gromma said. "That is the name my clan chief gave me. If he lives, and if he can be found, my people will stand behind him against the false baron. If not, she let the sentence die, and something in her face closed like a door. If not, then Draymore consolidates his hold on this valley, and it will not be long before he decides the old treaty is inconvenient and turns his soldiers on my people instead of his own tax rolls. War, Cyrus Ford, that is what happens if not." It was the first time she had said his name, and he felt it land somewhere low in his chest, foolishly, powerfully. "Then we'd best find him," Cyrus said. "Rowan Asheville." Gromma's amber eyes came up to his, sharp and searching. "You're not getting far chained to a cell wall on your own," he said, "and I expect I've lost my post already, whip or no whip, the moment Draymore hears what I did today. Might as well lose it for something worth losing it over." For a long moment she said nothing, only watched him with an expression he could not read, and then she said low, almost to herself, "You humans are strange creatures. You throw yourselves onto blades for people you have known an hour." "Some of us do," Cyrus said. "The rest of us just don't get caught at it." This time her laugh was real, a short, rough bark of sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him, and something passed between them through the rusted iron grate that neither of them had a name for yet, but that both of them, in their own way, already understood was going to change the whole shape of their lives. He worked the lock on the grate that night with a bent nail pried from the cell door's hinge, an old trick his uncle the ferryman had taught him when he was a boy who liked to sneak down to the river after curfew. And by the time the moon was high over Fording's rooftops, Gromma Mudborn's chains lay broken on the stone floor, and the two of them were slipping out through the market hall's cellar door into the sleeping town. They freed the wounded orc boy too. His name, she told Cyrus, was tusk-scarred Orem, young for a warrior, barely past his own coming-of-age rites, and left him in the care of a miller's widow on the town's edge who had lost her own son to Draymore's conscription, and asked no questions when Gromma pressed a strip of silver from her braid into the woman's palm, and asked only for bandages and silence. Orem would live, though he would not travel far for weeks yet, and so it was only the two of them, guardsman and envoy, who slipped down to the riverbank in the last hours of darkness, and stole a flat-bottomed skiff from beneath the ferry dock where Cyrus had learned to pole a boat before he had learned to walk steady on dry land. They were 3 miles downriver before dawn broke pink and gold over the water, and Cyrus, poling the skiff along the slow brown current of the Ash with his wounded arm aching, and his heart hammering with the enormity of what he had just done, desertion, theft, the freeing of a prisoner of the Baron's own household, looked up to find Gromma Mudborn watching him from the skiff's bow with an expression he had not seen on her before, something almost soft beneath the fierceness. "You gave that woman silver from your hair for bandages," he said, mostly to fill the silence, mostly because he did not trust himself to say the other things crowding behind his teeth. "I didn't take you for the charitable sort." "I am not," Gromma said. "I pay my debts. She will keep silent about Orem because silver buys silence better than threats do in my experience, and because her son died wearing colors he did not choose. That is not charity, that is strategy. "If you say so, I do say so." But there was the ghost of something warmer in her voice now, and when Cyrus glanced back at her, she was watching the river ahead of them rather than him, her jaw set in profile against the rising sun. And he thought foolishly, he told himself, foolishly and far too soon, that he had never in his life seen anything so striking as Gromma Mudborn with dawn light on her tusks, and the wind off the water pulling loose strands of black hair across her face. They traveled the river valley for the better part of a week, keeping to the water where they could and to the tree line where they could not. And the valley unspooled around them in all its rugged, working beauty, mill wheels turning slow and patient on tributary streams, farmsteads with their hay stacked golden against autumn's coming, the occasional walled village where they dared not stop, ruined watchtowers from some older war standing sentinel on the high ridges where the forest gave way to stone. Word of Draymore's soldiers reached them twice, riders on the road asking after a deserter guardsman and an escaped orc prisoner, and both times Gromma's instincts for the wild honed, she said, from childhood spent in the ridgeland stalking elk through country, far less forgiving than this, kept them hidden in bracken or bramble until the danger passed. It was on the fourth night, camped in a hollow beneath an outcrop of gray stone with a small fire burning low between them, that Cyrus first asked her to teach him to fight properly, having grown tired of feeling useless every time danger reared its head. And it was that night she told him the thing that would echo through everything that came after. "You handle a spear well enough for a guardsman," she said, watching him work through the form she had shown him an hour before, correcting the angle of his shoulders with a rough hand that lingered, he thought, half a second longer than strictly necessary. "But you fight like a man protecting a wall. You need to fight like a man protecting something that bleeds." "I don't follow." Gromma settled back on her heels across the fire from him, her amber eyes catching the firelight, and for a moment she looked less like a warrior and more like a woman remembering something old and important. "Among my people," she said, "it is known that a warrior with nothing to lose fights recklessly. She throws herself at death because death costs her nothing she has not already surrendered. She is dangerous, yes, but she is also careless, and carelessness gets a warrior killed as surely as cowardice does. My mother taught me this before she taught me to hold an axe. My kind fight best with something to lose, Cyrus Ford, not with nothing. A woman who has nothing to protect has no reason to be careful, no reason to survive the day rather than simply end it gloriously. But a woman who has someone waiting for her to come home, she fights differently. She counts every blow. She does not waste herself. She wins, where a warrior with nothing would only die well." Cyrus lowered his spear slowly, watching her across the fire. "Is that why you fought so carefully in the ring? Because of Orem?" Something flickered across Gromma's face, surprise, perhaps, that he had asked the question so directly, or perhaps discomfort at how close he had come to a truth she had not fully examined herself. "Orem is my kin," she said. "I have always fought carefully where kin is concerned. It is different, perhaps, to fight carefully for someone who is not blood. Is it?" "I would not know," she said, too quickly, and looked away into the fire. And Cyrus, watching the flames throw shifting light across the sharp planes of her face, felt something in his chest tighten with a longing he had no business feeling for a woman he had known less than a week. A woman who could break him in half without much effort, and who came from a people his own had warred against for generations. He told himself it did not matter, that the feeling would pass, that he was only a guardsman with more heart than sense who had gotten himself tangled up in something far larger than his own small life. He told himself this several times over the following days, and he believed it less each time he told it. They reached the ferryman's crossing at Hollow Reach on the seventh day, a narrow spot where the ash ran fast between two stone banks, and an old ferryman named Petrus worked a rope-end pulley barge for anyone with coin or a good enough story. Draymore's soldiers had been through only that morning. Petrus told them around a mouthful of pipe smoke, asking after exactly the two fugitives standing in front of him, And for a long moment Cyrus thought the old man might turn them in for the bounty that had surely been offered. Instead Petrus looked Gromma up and down, taking in the fitted leather of her cuirass, the proud set of her shoulders even in flight, and then looked at Cyrus with something like recognition. "You're the guardsman who stood in the whip's way at fording," he said. "My sister's boy was in that crowd, talked of nothing else for 2 days. Said a fording guard took a lash meant for an orc woman in chains, and half the square went quiet with shame over it." He knocked ash from his pipe against the barge's rail. "Get in the boat. Draymore's men can wait for the next crossing, and I'll tell them the current was too fast to run today. It won't be a lie, come to think of it." The crossing itself was tense, the barge groaning against the rope as the current fought it, spray coming up cold and silver in the autumn air, and Gromma stood at the barge's rail with one hand braced against a support post, and the other, without quite seeming to notice she had done it, resting against the small of Cyrus's back as the deck pitched beneath them, steadying him, or perhaps steadying herself, or perhaps, he thought later, simply wanting the contact and finding an excuse for it in the rocking of the boat. Neither of them spoke of it. Neither of them moved away. On the far bank, as Petrus pulled them in against the landing, Gromma pressed a small worn coin into the old ferryman's palm, the last of her clan-marked silver, and said, low and rough with something like gratitude she was clearly unused to expressing, "You did not have to help us." "No," Petrus agreed, "but a man ought to help where he can while he can. Seems to me that's a lesson your guardsman already knows." He nodded at Cyrus, and there was something almost fond in the old man's weathered face. "Go on, the both of you. There's a hunting trail up past the ridge that'll keep you clear of the road. An orc woman, whatever they say of your kind in town, you've got good taste in guardsmen at least." Gromma's laugh, surprised out of her again, rang bright across the water, and Cyrus felt his own face go warm with something that was not entirely embarrassment. It was 2 nights later, in a stand of birch trees above the tree line where they had made camp against the cold, that the current between them finally broke its banks. Cyrus had been keeping first watch, sitting with his back against a birch trunk and his spear across his knees, and Gromma had woken from a restless sleep with a nightmare's tension still coiled in her shoulders of the ring. She admitted quietly when he asked, of Orm's blood and Pell's whip and the particular helplessness of chains. And rather than return to sleep, she had come to sit beside him, closer than strict necessity required, her shoulder a warm line against his. "You should rest," she said, though she made no move to leave. "I will once you're settled." "I am settled. You don't look settled." She turned to look at him then, and in the moonlight filtering down through bare birch branches her face was very close to his, close enough that he could see the small scar through one eyebrow, the fine grain of her skin, the way her amber eyes had gone soft and searching in a way he had not seen from her before. "You confuse me, Cyrus Ford," she said quietly. "Among my people, a man who bleeds for a woman not his kin, who follows her into exile with no promise of reward, who looks at her the way you look at me, such a man declares himself. He does not simply wait, hoping to be noticed." "I didn't think I had the right," Cyrus said, his voice gone rough. "You're an envoy of a warrior clan." "I'm a guardsman who lost his post protecting a woman he'd known for the length of an afternoon. I didn't think there was a version of this where you'd want." He stopped, because she had leaned closer, because her breath was warm against his jaw, because every rational objection in his head had gone suddenly, thoroughly silent. "Let me decide what I want," Gromma murmured, and then she kissed him. It was not gentle, not at first. There was nothing gentle in the way she moved, in the fierce sureness of a warrior who had decided something and meant to act on it. But it gentled as it went on, her hand coming up to cradle the side of his face with a tenderness that seemed to surprise her as much as it undid him. And when they finally broke apart, both of them breathing unsteadily in the cold night air, she pressed her forehead to his and said, low and rough, "I have fought 100 battles with nothing to lose, Cyrus Ford, and I have survived every one of them through recklessness and luck. I do not know yet what it is to fight with something to lose. But I think I am about to find out, and I think it terrifies me more than any blade ever has. I'm not going anywhere, Cyrus said, and meant it with everything he had. No, she agreed, and there was something fierce and possessive in the way she said it, something that told him this was not a passing thing for her, not a comfort taken in exile and forgotten once danger passed. You are not. They found Rowan Asheville's people 11 days later, deep in the wild country north of Hollow Reach where the forest grew thick and the ridges climbed toward the old mountain passes. And they found them the hard way. An arrow through the crown of Cyrus's hat, close enough to part his hair, and a rope snare that dropped Gromma from her feet and left her hanging, cursing magnificently in her own tongue, 3 feet above a game trail, while a dozen armed figures emerged from the trees around them. They were a ragged band, outlaws by the look of their patched leathers and mismatched weapons, but disciplined in a way that spoke of real training beneath the rags. And their leader, when he stepped forward to look Cyrus and the still-suspended Gromma over, was a lean, hard-eyed man perhaps 10 years Cyrus's senior, with a shock of prematurely gray hair and a manner that carried authority the way some men carry a sword, without needing to draw it to prove it was there. A guardsman and an orc, the man said. That's not a pairing I see often, and I've seen a great deal in these woods. What's Draymore's man doing this deep in outlaw country? I'm not Draymore's man, Cyrus said, standing his ground though every instinct told him to reach for the woman still hanging upside down and furious above him. I deserted his service a fortnight past. We're looking for Rowan Asheville. Something shifted in the outlaw leader's face, a tightening, a wariness, and behind him his band drew subtly closer together, hands going to hilts. That's a dangerous name to go asking after, the man said. Rowan Asheville is a branded thief, cast out of the valley 8 years gone. Whatever business you think you have with him, you'd do better to forget it and turn back the way you came. We come on behalf of the Mudborn clan, Gromma said from her undignified position, to renew an old treaty, if he yet lives and yet has the will to fight for what was taken from him. Cut me down, and I will explain the rest without shouting it upside down at you. The leader studied her a long moment, then gestured, and one of his men cut the snare rope, letting Gromma drop into a controlled crouch, dirt and dignity both somewhat disturbed but her fierceness entirely intact. She rose to her full height, a full head taller than the gray-haired man, and looked him dead in the eye. I am Gromma Mudborn, envoy of Clan Mudborn, she said. And you, I think, know exactly where to find the man we seek, because I do not believe outlaws this well-organized follow no one, and I do not believe a band this disciplined operates in Draymore's shadow without a purpose greater than simple thievery. The gray-haired man's mouth twitched, something like reluctant respect crossing his weathered face. You've got sharp eyes for an envoy, he said. Come on, then, both of you. But know this, if you mean my people harm, the forest will have you before nightfall, and no one will ever find what's left. He led them deep into the hidden camp, a cluster of lean-tos and hide tents arranged in a hollow shielded by rock and thick pine, smoke from cookfires curling up through gaps in the canopy that would not betray them to the sky. And there, seated on a fallen log near the central fire, mending a bowstring with quick, practiced fingers, was a man who looked up at their approach with tired gray eyes that held, beneath their weariness, an unmistakable echo of nobility. A man who could have passed for a common woodsman, but for the way he carried himself, the way the whole camp's attention shifted toward him the moment he rose to his feet. Rowan, the gray-haired leader said, these two came asking for you by name. The orc claims to speak for the Mudborn clan. The man called Rowan set down his bowstring slowly, his eyes moving over Gromma with an intensity that made Cyrus's hand twitch toward his spear before he made himself stand still. The Mudborn clan, Rowan said quietly. My uncle's treaty. I did not think anyone still honored it after all this time. He crossed the clearing toward them, and Cyrus saw, as he moved, that the man favored his left leg slightly, an old injury never properly healed, and that his hands, though scarred with years of hard living, moved with a grace that spoke of training far beyond what any common outlaw would have received. "My chief sent me to find you," Gromma said. "If you yet lived, and if you yet meant to reclaim what was stolen from you. Draymore sits in your uncle's seat and calls himself Baron. My people will not stand idle while a usurper decides whether the old peace still suits him." Rowan's jaw tightened, and for a long moment he said nothing, staring into the middle distance with the look of a man weighing 8 years of exile against the sudden, dangerous possibility of hope. "They branded me a thief," he said finally, low and rough, "for a crime Draymore committed and pinned on me so that I could never claim my uncle's seat when he died. I have carried that brand for 8 years. Do you know what it means to be a branded man in this valley? No inn will house you. No court will hear your word against an honest man's. I could stand in the market square of Fording itself and declare the truth of what Draymore did, and they would clap me in irons before the sentence finished leaving my mouth, brand or no brand, truth or no truth." "Then don't declare it in a market square," Cyrus said, surprising himself by speaking at all in the presence of a man who might yet be the rightful lord of the entire valley. "Declare it somewhere they can't clap you in irons before the words land. Somewhere with enough people watching that even Draymore's soldiers can't silence you without the whole valley seeing it happen." Rowan turned to look at him properly for the first time, taking in the guardsman's mended jerkin, the spear, the plain, unremarkable face of a man who had never expected to matter in any story larger than his own small life. "And where would you suggest, guardsman?" "The autumn tithe gathering," Cyrus said, the idea forming even as he spoke it. "Every farmstead and mill in the valley sends grain and coin to Fording Square once the harvest's in. It's the one day of the year the whole valley turns out in one place, freemen and barons' men both, because Draymore needs the tithe counted and blessed before witnesses or the farmers riot over cheating. If you stood up in that square in front of everyone and showed them the brand and told them the truth of who put it there, they would still see a branded thief," Rowan said, but there was something new in his voice now, something considering rather than dismissive. "Not if the truth comes with proof," Gromma said, "and not if it comes backed by warriors who have no reason to lie for you." She looked to the gray-haired outlaw leader, who had been listening with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "How many stand with you in this camp and beyond it?" "Near 60 in these woods," the man said. "More scattered through the valley who'd take up arms if they thought there was a true cause worth the risk. Farmers Draymore's taxed near to starving. Millers whose wheels he seized for grinding his own grain first. There's no love for that man in this valley, orc woman, only fear of what he'd do to anyone who spoke against him." "Then let us give them something stronger than fear," Gromma said, and Cyrus, watching her in the firelight, saw the warrior in her come fully alight, not the reckless creature who might once have thrown herself at Draymore's gates alone and died gloriously for the attempt, but something more dangerous now, something patient and calculating and utterly determined to survive long enough to see this through. "I can send word to my clan. If Rowan Asheville stands in that square and names Draymore a usurper and a liar before the whole valley, and if my clan's warriors stand visible at the wood's edge in support of the true heir, Draymore will not dare order a massacre in front of every witness who matters to his claim of legitimate rule. But he will try something. A man like that does not surrender a seat of power because the truth was spoken aloud. He will strike, and strike hard, the moment he understands what is coming." "Then we'd best be ready when he does," Cyrus said. Rowan Asheville studied the two of them for a long moment, the guardsman who had walked into a hidden outlaw camp with nothing but a spear and a plain, honest face, the orc envoy who spoke of strategy and survival with a fire that clearly ran deeper than duty, and something in his tired gray eyes shifted toward hope for the first time in what looked like a very long while. 8 years I have waited for someone with reason to help me and no reason to lie," he said quietly. "I did not expect that someone to arrive in pairs or in such an unlikely shape, but I will not question good fortune when it walks into my camp, We plan for the tithe gathering then, 3 weeks hence." The days that followed were the fullest of Cyrus's life. Riders sent quiet and careful into the deep ridgelands to carry word to the Mudborn clan. Outlaws drilled in the woods until their ragged discipline sharpened into something closer to an army. Rowan Asheville's old wound tended, and his strength built back through hard exercise. The whole camp humming with the particular energy of people who have found, after long years of merely surviving, something worth actually fighting for. And through it all, Gromma Mudborn and Cyrus Ford grew closer with every day that passed, in the way that people grow close when danger presses in from every side, and there is no time left to be careful with feelings that have already declared themselves. She taught him to fight with a curved blade in the evenings, correcting his stance with hands that lingered, laughing, actually laughing, a sound he had come to treasure above almost anything else in his life. When he tripped over his own feet trying to mimic a footwork drill she made look effortless. He taught her, in turn, small things she had never had cause to learn: how to skip a flat stone across still water, how to whittle a simple flute from river birch, how to sit quiet at dusk and simply watch the light change without needing it to mean anything or lead anywhere. She told him one night about her mother, dead now 11 years, a warrior who had fought 3 border wars and outlived them all, and who had told her daughter on her deathbed that the secret of her survival had never been strength or skill alone, but the husband and daughter waiting for her beyond every battlefield, the reason to come home rather than simply to win. "I did not understand her when she said it," Gromma admitted, her head resting against Cyrus's shoulder as they sat together outside her tent, the camp quiet around them under a sky thick with stars. "I thought glory was reason enough. I thought a warrior who needed something beyond herself to fight for was somehow lesser, softer, than one who fought for pride alone. And now—" She turned her head to look at him, and in the starlight her amber eyes were very soft, very open, in a way he suspected few people beyond himself had ever been permitted to see. "Now I think my mother was the strongest woman I have ever known," she said, "and I think I finally understand why. I have something to lose now, Cyrus Ford. You have made a warrior who feared nothing suddenly afraid of a great many things, and I find strangely that it has made me sharper rather than weaker. I count every risk now. I plan rather than charge. I want very badly to survive whatever comes because the alternative means leaving you behind, and I find that unacceptable." "Good," Cyrus said, his voice thick with feeling he did not bother to hide. "Because I intend to be very difficult to leave behind." She kissed him then, slow and deep and certain, and later in the warm dark of her tent with the camp's fires burned low outside, she claimed him fully orc custom. She told him after, murmuring against his skin in the drowsy aftermath, required a warrior to mark her chosen mate with a token carved from her own hand, and she pressed into his palm a small polished stone, river smooth, etched with a symbol he did not recognize but that she told him meant, roughly translated, "my reason." He carried it after that in a pouch at his belt, and touched it, more than once in the days that followed, like a man reaching for a talisman he could not imagine living without. Word came back from the Mudborn clan 9 days later, carried by a lean scout on a lathered horse. The clan chief had agreed to send warriors to stand at Fording's wood line on the day of the tithe gathering, a show of strength and legitimacy that would make clear to every farmer and miller in the valley that the old treaty still held, and that Rowan Asheville did not stand alone. But the scout brought darker news as well. Draymore's spies had grown suspicious of unusual movement in the northern woods, and patrols had doubled along every road leading toward Fording. "He suspects something," Rowan said grimly, reading the full report by firelight. "He does not know what, but he suspects." "Then we move faster than he expects and strike where he does not," Gromma said. "The tithe gathering in 3 days' time. We do not wait for him to discover the whole of it." It was 2 nights before the gathering that disaster found them, when a patrol larger than any they had yet encountered swept through the forest's edge in a wide net, driven, it would later become clear, by a captured outlaw scout who had broken under torture and given up the camp's rough location. Cyrus was on watch at the camp's southern edge when the first arrow hissed past his ear, and within moments the quiet forest had erupted into chaos, steel ringing against steel, torches flaring against the dark, Draymore's soldiers pressing hard through the trees in numbers that made the outlaw band's 60 look desperately thin. Cyrus fought as Gromma had taught him, careful and economical rather than reckless, and he held his ground at the camp's edge long enough to buy time for the wounded and the unarmed to fall back deeper into the woods. But in the chaos, a soldier he had not seen came up hard behind him, and only Gromma's roaring war cry and the flat of her blade across the man's helm saved him from a blade in the back. "Stay close," she snarled, blood and firelight streaking her face, and for the length of that terrible fight Cyrus saw exactly what a warrior who fought carefully, who fought to survive rather than simply to win gloriously, truly looked like. Every strike of hers placed with brutal efficiency, every movement calculated to end a threat with the least possible exposure to harm, because she had, as she had promised him weeks before, something now that she could not bear to lose. But numbers told in the end, and as the fighting pushed deeper into the camp, a soldier bearing Draymore's own household colors, not a common patrolman but one of Pell's picked men, sent specifically, it would later emerge, to capture rather than kill any guardsman found among the outlaws, knowing exactly what leverage a deserter's life might buy against an orc envoy grown suddenly. Dangerously important, put a crossbow bolt through the meat of Cyrus's thigh and dragged him, bleeding and half-conscious, back through the chaos toward the retreating patrol's rear guard. Gromma's scream when she saw him taken was not the cry of a warrior losing a tactical asset. It was raw, animal, torn from somewhere far beneath strategy or calculation, and Cyrus, fading in and out of clear thought as rough hands bound his wrists and hauled him onto a soldier's saddle, heard it echo through the burning camp and thought, with strange clarity even through the pain, that it was the most terrible and the most beautiful sound he had ever heard a person make on his behalf. They held him at Fording, in the very cell block beneath the market hall where he and Gromma had first spoken through a rusted grate, and Pell himself came to gloat over him the morning after his capture, informing him with evident satisfaction that Lord Draymore intended to hang him publicly at the tithe, gathering as an example to any other guardsman who might consider treason, and more usefully, as bait. Since word had reached the keep that an orc warrior calling herself an envoy of the Mudborn clan had been seen leading outlaws in the northern woods, and Draymore wagered correctly that such a woman would not simply abandon a captured lover to the gallows without attempting a rescue. That could then be crushed in front of the entire valley, ending any threat of rebellion before it truly began. "She will come," Pell said, "and when she does, his lordship means to make quite a spectacle of putting her down, right alongside you. 2 nooses, I expect, side by side, so the valley understands exactly what becomes of treason and treaty-breaking both." Cyrus, bloodied and exhausted and in more pain than he had ever known, found he was not afraid for himself so much as he was afraid, desperately for her, afraid that his capture would force her hand, force her to abandon the careful plan they had built for a reckless rescue that could undo everything, get her killed in a fury of grief and fear, rather than the cold, patient survival she had only just learned to want. He did not know, chained in that cell with the gallows being built outside his high window, that he had underestimated her utterly. The tithe gathering fell on a bright, cold morning 3 days later, and Fording's market square filled early with farmers and millers come to see their grain and coin counted, filled fuller still, unusually, with word having spread overnight that a guardsman-turned-traitor would hang alongside an outlaw's second before the counting began, a rare and grim entertainment that drew every soul within walking distance of the town. They brought Cyrus out at midday, his wrists bound, his wounded leg forcing him to lean hard on the soldier who marched him toward the gallows platform erected at the square's center. And Lord Herrick Draymore himself stood waiting there for the first time since Cyrus had entered this story, a heavy-set man in fine black and silver, his boar's head crest gleaming at his throat, his face carrying the particular soft cruelty of a man who has never once had to fight for anything he possesses. "Guardsman Ford," Draymore said, loud enough for the whole square to hear, "you had a post, a purpose, a place in this valley, and you threw it all away for an orc's chains. Today the valley will see what such foolishness earns a man." The crowd murmured, uneasy, some faces turned away in shame, others hard with the particular fear that keeps silent tongues in a usurper's shadow, and Cyrus, standing at the noose's edge with his legs screaming and his heart pounding, searched the crowd's edges without quite daring to hope, and found nothing but ordinary farmers and frightened faces. Then the wood line at the square's far edge erupted. They came from 3 directions at once, Rowan Asheville's outlaws pouring from the alleys between the mill houses, the Mudborn clan warriors sweeping down from the northern ridge road in a line of painted shields and raised axes that made the crowd scream and scatter. And at the very center of that second charge, ahead even of her own clan's warriors, came Gromma Mudborn on foot, moving faster than any armored soldier had a right to move. Her curved blade already drawn, and her amber eyes fixed with terrible singular focus on the gallows platform, where the man she loved stood with a rope already looped around his neck. Draymore's soldiers, caught utterly unprepared, scrambled to form a line, and Pell himself, screaming orders that no one obeyed fast enough, grabbed for the lever that would drop the gallows trap beneath Cyrus's feet. But Gromma reached the platform first, closing the last 20 yards in a burst of speed that seemed almost unnatural, and her blade took the lever clean from Pell's grasping hand before he could pull it. The man himself stumbling back with a cry as the weapon's edge came within a finger's width of his throat. "Touch that lever again," Gromma snarled, "and it will be the last thing your hand ever does." She turned then to Cyrus, and in the chaos of the square soldiers and outlaws clashing at the platform's edge, Rowan Asheville's voice somewhere behind them ringing out over the noise, demanding the crowd's attention, demanding they look and listen. She cut the rope from his neck with 2 fast strokes of her blade and caught him bodily as his wounded leg finally buckled, holding him upright against her own body with an arm banded hard around his waist. "I told you I was not going anywhere," Cyrus managed, half laughing, half weeping with relief and pain and disbelief that she had actually come, that she had come with an army rather than alone, that she had planned this rather than thrown herself recklessly into it. "Looks like you weren't either." "I fight carefully now," Gromma said fiercely, her forehead pressed hard to his, blood and sweat and tears mingling on both their faces. "I told you why. I was not about to lose the reason. I finally learned how." Behind them, across the square, Rowan Asheville had climbed the tithe-counting table itself, visible now to the whole panicked, scattering crowd, and he tore back his own sleeve to bear the brand seared into his forearm 8 years before, a thief's mark. Everyone in the valley knew that shape on sight, and shouted, in a voice that cracked with 8 years of buried fury, the truth that stopped even the fighting soldiers in their tracks. This brand was Herrick Draymore's crime, not mine. Rowan roared, and the square, disbelieving, terrified, hungry for truth after 8 years of a usurper's rule, went suddenly, utterly silent to hear it. "He stole the tithe gold himself, the autumn before my uncle died, and paid the magistrate to brand me for it rather than face the truth, because a branded man cannot inherit, and with me disgraced, only Draymore's false claim of cousinage stood between him and my uncle's seat. I have proof, kept safe these 8 years, the magistrate's own confession, sworn before he died, naming Draymore's gold as the price of my ruin. I do not ask you to simply believe a branded man's word. I ask you to look at the army of honest folk and honored allies who stand here today, risking everything, because they believed it enough to fight for it." The crowd's murmur swelled into something louder, something dangerous now to Draymore rather than to Rowan. farmers and millers who had suffered 8 years of crushing tithes and seized grain suddenly finding their fear curdling into fury. And Draymore, seeing his soldiers wavering, seeing the Mudborn warriors holding their ground unbroken at the square's edge, seeing his own hired men beginning to lower their blades rather than fight a battle they now understood they could not win with honor or even with force, turned to flee toward the keep's gate, only to find his path blocked by Cyrus Ford himself, wounded leg and all, standing with a soldier's spear leveled steady in his hands. "You'll not run from this the way you ran from justice 8 years ago," Cyrus said, his voice carrying clear across the suddenly hushed square, and behind him, close enough that her presence alone seemed to steady his aching leg, Gromma Mudborn stood with her blade still drawn, not moving to strike, simply standing as an immovable wall between the usurper and any hope of escape. Draymore's nerve broke entirely then, and he sank to his knees in the dirt of his own tithe square, surrounded by farmers he had bled dry, outlaws he had branded and hunted, and an orc clan whose treaty he had meant to tear apart. And the fight, such as it had been, was over almost before it had properly begun. Draymore's soldiers, seeing their lord's nerve fail and Rowan Asheville's proof and army both arrayed against them, laid down their arms rather than die for a man who had never once earned their loyalty beyond fear. The days that followed were a whirlwind Cyrus would remember only in fragments. Rowan Asheville installed properly in his uncle's keep before the valley's assembled freeholders. The true magistrate's confession read aloud and sealed in the valley's records. Draymore himself sent under Mudborn guard to face judgment before the crown's distant court, rather than the quicker justice the crowd had briefly, furiously demanded. He remembered his leg being properly tended by a healer summoned from the keep itself, remembered Gromma refusing to leave his bedside for 2 full days despite Rowan's insistence that she rest, remembered waking on the second night to find her asleep at last in a chair beside him, her hand still wrapped tight around his even in sleep, as though she feared he might vanish the moment her grip loosened. Rowan Asheville, once properly seated as Baron of the Valley, renewed the old treaty with the Mudborn clan in a formal ceremony held in the very market square where the gallows had so nearly claimed Cyrus's life. The same square now hung with banners rather than nooses, filled with a crowd that had come to celebrate rather than to watch a hanging. He offered Cyrus, in gratitude, a formal post within the keep's own guard, a captaincy far beyond anything the young man could ever have earned through ordinary years of service. And Cyrus, standing in that square with Gromma's hand warm in his own, found himself, for the first time in his whole overlooked, ordinary life, being looked at not with pity or indifference but with genuine respect. "You could have a fine life here," Rowan told him quietly, after the formal ceremony had ended and the crowd had begun to disperse toward the evening celebrations. "A captaincy, a house within the keep's walls, a name people will remember for what you did in that square. You've earned it twice over." Cyrus looked to Gromma, who stood watching him with her arms crossed and an expression that was trying, not very successfully, to hide how much his answer mattered to her. "I appreciate it," Cyrus said, "truly. But I think Gromma and I have had enough of walls and keeps and other men's seats of power for a good while yet. There's a whole valley out there I've only ever seen from a guardsman's post or a fugitive's hiding place. I think we'd like to see some of it properly, without anyone chasing us for once." Rowan's tired gray eyes crinkled with something like real warmth. "The offer stands. Whenever you tire of the road, this valley owes you both more than it can ever properly repay." That evening, as the tithe square filled with music and firelight, and the particular joyous noise of a valley finally free of a usurper's shadow, Gromma drew Cyrus away from the celebration, down toward the riverbank where the ash ran dark and quiet under a rising moon, the same river that had carried them both away from Fording's cells so many weeks before. "You surprised me today," she said, standing close, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw with a tenderness that still, every time, undid something careful in his chest. "I thought perhaps you would take the captaincy. It is more than a man like you could ever have hoped for before all this." "A man like me," Cyrus repeated and found he was smiling. "I used to think that phrase meant something small, overlooked, not built for anything larger than a guardsman's post and a quiet life by the river, but I don't think that anymore. Not since you looked at me through a rusted grate and decided, for reasons I still don't fully understand, that I was worth choosing." "I decided," Gromma said, low and certain, "because you stepped into a whip's path for a woman you owed nothing. Because you gave up everything you had, small as it was, the very first moment it mattered. I have known warriors far stronger than you, Cyrus Ford, chieftains and champions both, but I have never known one braver, and I have never wanted one more." She kissed him then, there on the riverbank with the moon on the water and the valley's celebration glowing warm in the distance behind them. And when they finally broke apart, she pressed the small carved stone she had given him weeks before back into his palm, closing his fingers around it with both her hands. "My reason," she said again, softer now than the first time. "That is what it means, the marking I gave you. Among my people, when a warrior gives such a token, it is a claiming, a declaration that she has chosen a mate and means to keep him, and will let no danger in this world or the next take him from her without a fight that costs her everything she has to give. I did not fully understand what I was offering that first night. I understand it completely now. You are the reason I stopped fighting like a woman with nothing to lose, Cyrus Ford. You made me sharper and safer and stronger, simply by giving me something worth surviving for. I mean to keep you if you'll have me. I've wanted to be had since the moment you laughed at me through that grate," Cyrus said, his voice thick, "and I have no intention of ever changing my mind." They left the valley 3 weeks later, once his leg had healed enough for proper travel, riding 2 sturdy horses gifted by Rowan Asheville's grateful new household, with no fixed destination beyond the simple, extraordinary freedom of choosing their own road for the first time in either of their lives. They passed through the river valley's farms and mills one last time on their way toward the wider world beyond it, past Hollow Reach, where old Petrus the ferryman waved them across with a knowing grin and refused to take any coin at all, past the ridgelands where the Mudborn clan's watchfires still burned steady now under a treaty finally, properly honored, past the market square at Fording itself, quiet now under an ordinary autumn morning, no gallows, no whip. Nothing left of that terrible first day, but the memory of a chained woman who would not kneel and a guardsman who could not stand by and watch. They did not look back as they rode north together into open country, the river valley's mills and fields giving way slowly to wilder land beyond, and Gromma Mudborn, riding easy in her saddle with the autumn sun warm on her shoulders and her hand reaching, unbidden, to find Cyrus Ford's whenever the trail allowed it, thought that she had been wrong once to believe that glory alone was reason enough to fight. She had found something better than glory on a whipping ring's dirt floor in a town she had never meant to visit, and she meant to spend every remaining year of her long orc life proving that she had chosen well, and been chosen in return, by a man the world had once overlooked but who had never, not for one single moment since, been anything less than everything to her. Cyrus Ford, for his part, guardsman no longer, captain of nothing but his own small extraordinary life, rode beside the fiercest, most beautiful, most impossibly devoted woman he had ever known or ever hoped to know, and understood with the particular clarity of a man who has been truly and thoroughly chosen, that he had stopped being ordinary and overlooked the moment Gromma Mudborn had decided, against every reasonable expectation of her world or his, that he was worth fighting carefully to keep. They rode on together into the wide, waiting country, free at last, and neither of them was ever alone again.